The desert night slept under a pale moon, until a gunshot split the silence like thunder, echoing across Graystone's dust-filled street. Ethan Cole, a rugged man in his late 30s, stumbled from the shadows, revolver shaking in his scarred hand. His leather duster clung to him, frayed edges snapping in the wind. Ethan muttered, "I swore this life was done with me." The town stirred, shutters slammed, lanterns flared, and fear seeped through wood and glass. The saloon doors swung open, revealing Sheriff Barrow, tall and gray-haired, his polished badge glowing like cold fire. Barrow's voice carried sharp. "You should have stayed gone, Cole." Ethan's jaw clenched, eyes stormed with regret and rage. A woman's scream pierced from a second-story window, her shadow twisting in lamplight. Tension strangled the street as every townsperson froze, trapped in silence. The outlaw and the lawman faced each other, the air thick with memory, blood, and the promise of violence yet to come. The silence lingered like a noose, broken only by the moan of swinging doors. Ethan's revolver lowered slightly, his stance stiff with old rage. Sheriff Barrow sneered, "You don't belong here. Bloodstains don't fade." Ethan replied, voice ragged, "I never asked to come back. Fate dragged me." Behind shuttered windows, townsfolk whispered, afraid to breathe too loud. A figure stepped from the stable shadows, Daniel Hayes, barely 20, with hopeful eyes unbroken by time. Daniel said, "You shouldn't face him alone." Ethan's voice cut sharp. "This fight isn't yours, boy." But Daniel's resolve didn't waver. Sheriff Barrow's smirk widened. "Then we'll bury 2 outlaws tonight." Tension snapped like a wire stretched too far. The desert wind howled through empty alleys, rattling signs, and all of Graystone braced for the storm that had only begun. Daniel stood firm, his breath clouding in the cold night. Ethan whispered harshly, "You'll get yourself killed." Daniel shot back, "Then I'll die for something worth dying for." Sheriff Barrow chuckled, hand loose on his revolver, laughter cold as iron. The piano inside the saloon faltered, silence swallowing every note. Lantern glow sharpened Barrow's face into cruel lines. Ethan felt the weight of memory pressing on him, faces of the dead flashing before his eyes. He muttered, "I can't shield you from this world." Daniel answered, jaw clenched, "Then show me how to fight it." The boy's defiance burned brighter than his fear. Boots shifted on the dirt, sound heavy in the silence. Graystone Street had found its second outlaw, and the lawman's smirk promised no mercy. Wind cut through the street, carrying dust like ash. 4 deputies emerged from shadows, rifles slung and eyes hard with loyalty. Ethan's voice low, "The whole town's his weapon." Daniel's fists balled tight, anger trembling in his veins. Behind doors, townsfolk prayed unseen. Sheriff Barrow's tone boomed, "Redemption won't find you, Cole, only your grave." Ethan steadied his revolver, eyes heavy with doubt. He muttered, "Maybe it's time justice found its mark." Daniel nodded sharply, his youth burning against fear. Lantern flames bent in the wind, stretching shadows tall across the walls. A deputy cocked his rifle, the metallic click ringing like a death bell. The showdown had become larger than 2 men. It was Graystone itself on the line. The night trembled on the edge of chaos. Ethan's revolver steadied, hands no longer shaking. He muttered, "Barrow, you've stolen enough." Barrow smirked, boots gleaming. "I'll take the rest. You're a relic, Cole." Behind him, Daniel stood defiant, eyes sharp with courage beyond his years. "We don't fear you," the boy spat. Deputies shifted uneasily, the air choking with tension. Somewhere distant, a dog barked, sharp and cutting, as though echoing the dread. Ethan glanced upward, catching the trembling shadow of the woman above. His voice cracked low. "This town's drowning in silence. Tonight it hears truth." A gust swept dust across the street, lantern flames snapping, casting erratic light. Every soul hiding within Graystone felt the storm gather, each heartbeat pounding with the knowledge that blood would fall before dawn. The tension on Graystone Street broke when the sheriff's deputies retreated into shadows, leaving only dust and silence behind. Ethan lowered his revolver, but his chest burned with guilt. Daniel whispered, "You stood tall against him." Ethan's voice cracked. "That wasn't courage. That was history dragging me down." Daniel's youthful face glowed with stubborn hope. "Then let me carry part of it." Ethan shook his head, haunted eyes scanning the town where shadows clung like chains. In the second-story window, the frightened woman vanished, her silhouette gone from the lamplight. Sheriff Barrow's smirk lingered like poison in Ethan's memory. A church bell tolled midnight, its sound heavy as judgment. Ethan muttered, "This town remembers me only in blood." Daniel replied, steady, "Then maybe it's time they remembered justice instead." The outlaw and the boy stood in silence, while Graystone seemed to hold its breath, caught between fear of the sheriff and hope of change. Inside the saloon, the smell of whiskey and sweat hung thick as Ethan pushed through the swinging doors. Men fell silent, eyes narrowing, whispers spreading like fire. The piano player froze mid-note. Sheriff Barrow stood at the far end, leaning casually with a glass in hand, his badge reflecting lamplight. Barrow said coolly, "You've got some nerve walking in here, Cole." Ethan replied, voice low and steady, "I came for answers." Daniel shadowed him, eyes wide at the sight of gamblers, drifters, and Barrow's loyal men watching. Barrow chuckled, "You'll find nothing but ghosts here." Ethan's jaw tightened, memories of betrayal flashing across his face. Our dealer muttered, "Best get out before the law nails you again." Daniel glared at him, but Ethan placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, steadying him. "We'll leave when I've heard the truth," Ethan muttered. The room thickened with silence, every stare a dagger. The saloon's air grew heavier as a woman's figure descended the stairs, her heels striking wood like a drumbeat. Clara Monroe, mid-30s, elegant yet hardened, moved with practiced grace, eyes cold yet hiding sorrow. She wore a deep crimson dress, its silk catching the lamplight. Her voice carried sharp as a blade. "Ethan Cole, the outlaw who ran when his people bled." Ethan's chest tightened. Clara's gaze lingered, torn between anger and something unspoken. Daniel whispered, "Who is she?" Ethan muttered, "A memory that cuts deeper than a knife." Sheriff Barrow smirked. "Clara remembers well, don't you?" She sipped her wine, lips curling faintly. "I remember men who promised justice, then left us to rot." Ethan's voice cracked with regret. "I came back to finish what I failed." Clara's expression faltered for just a second, revealing a fracture in her hardened mask before her eyes steeled again. Ethan's fists clenched as Barrow raised his glass, mocking. "This town doesn't need your redemption. It already has order." Ethan's voice was steady but strained. "Order built on fear isn't justice." Daniel stepped forward, fire in his young voice. "People deserve better." The saloon's patrons exchanged uneasy glances, whispers crawling like snakes. Clara's gaze flickered between Ethan and Barrow, torn in her silence. Barrow's smirk thinned, his voice darker. "Justice is what I decide. And in Graystone, my word is law." Ethan's revolver twitched at his side, his scars burning with memory. He muttered, "That law dies tonight." The crowd stirred, fear mixing with faint hope. Clara whispered, almost to herself, "This will burn the town down." Barrow's glass shattered against the floor, the sharp crack echoing. Ethan and Daniel stood taller, no longer shadows but sparks against the sheriff's darkness. The night outside the saloon felt colder when Ethan and Daniel stepped back into the street, silence trailing them. Daniel's voice broke the quiet. "Why does she hate you so?" Ethan's shoulders sagged. "Because once I swore to protect her, and I failed." The boy studied him with wide eyes. "And now?" Ethan looked toward the church steeple, its bell dark and still. "Now I fight for the piece of me I lost here." Daniel's face tightened, his innocence fading. "Then I'll fight with you." Ethan's hand fell heavy on the boy's shoulder, his tone grim. "This war will scar you, Daniel." The boy's reply came fast. "Then let it scar me. Better that, than living on my knees. A storm cloud rolled across the moon, plunging Graystone into shadow. The silence grew sharper, as though the town itself listened, waiting for the next gunshot to decide its fate. The storm clouds rolled low over Graystone as dawn's faint light touched the desert horizon. Ethan leaned against a post outside the church, his eyes hollow, his revolver heavy at his side. Daniel paced like a restless colt, his youthful energy fighting the weight of fear. "They won't stop, will they?" he asked. Ethan's voice came slow, edged with exhaustion. "Not until blood has settled old debts." The church door creaked, and from the shadows stepped Marcus Kane, a grizzled man in his 60s, face scarred, gait slowed by an old wound. Once a gunslinger, now a mentor. His voice rasped, "Barrow feeds on fear. But fear breaks when men decide to fight." Ethan met his gaze, bitterness flickering. "And when they fall instead," Marcus answered, eyes cold steel. "Then they fall standing, not crawling." Daniel's breath quickened, his gaze shifting between them. The boy saw not just a mentor's wisdom, but a challenge carved in the dust of Graystone. Inside the church, wooden pews sat empty, dust rising in shafts of pale morning light. Ethan's boots echoed against the floorboards as Marcus followed him inside. Daniel lingered at the doorway, torn between awe and fear. Marcus's voice carried, "Faith isn't what saves men. It's what steadies their hand when they must pull the trigger." Ethan turned sharply, anger etched into his voice. "You think killing is salvation?" Marcus leaned on the altar rail, weathered hands gripping wood worn smooth by years. "No, but survival often demands it." Daniel's voice trembled but held conviction. "There has to be another way." Marcus studied him, a ghost of a smile tugging at his scarred cheek. "The young always hope for better, but hope won't stop bullets." Ethan lowered his head, the weight of truth pressing down. The silence of the church carried both judgment and a grim blessing. Ethan stepped outside, the street alive with whispers of unrest. A merchant packed his stall in silence, while mothers hurried children inside, eyes darting nervously. Daniel asked, "Why does the town let him rule?" Ethan's face hardened. "Because fear chains deeper than iron." Marcus limped behind, his cane striking dirt with every step. "Barrow owns their silence, same as he owns their law." The boy's fists clenched, fire burning. "Then we tear his chains apart." Ethan sighed, his voice a weight. "Chains cut both ways, break them, and you bleed." Marcus' scarred face softened briefly. "But better blood than shackles." As the morning sun burned higher, the town felt trapped in its own shadow, each shuttered window a prison, each closed door a silent plea for someone to fight. Ethan's soul groaned under it, knowing the burden rested on him again. Ethan halted at the old well in the square, memories flashing like ghosts in the dust. Years ago, he had defended this very spot, only to leave it in ruin. Marcus rested his weight on his cane, his eyes narrowing. "Barrow is only a man, Cole. His deputies bleed same as you." Ethan's voice cracked. "And so do those who stand beside me." Daniel's voice surged with conviction. "Then let me be one of them." Ethan turned sharply, his gaze drilling into the boy. "Do you understand what dying feels like?" Daniel's voice wavered but did not break. "I understand living without fighting isn't living at all." Marcus nodded slowly, pride glinting through years of regret. "The boy's got more courage than most men here." Ethan's hand clenched around his revolver grip. His silence spoke louder than words. War had already chosen him. The church bell tolled noon, its sound hollow over the town. Sheriff Barrow appeared at the far end of the street, flanked by 2 deputies, his polished boots crunching dust, his badge gleaming like a curse. The crowd scattered to shadows, leaving Ethan, Daniel, and Marcus in plain sight. Barrow's voice cut sharp. "Graystone bows to the law, not to ghosts." Ethan's chest rose with steady breath, his revolver twitching at his side. Marcus stepped forward, cane planted like a stake. Law without justice is just another word for tyranny. Barrow's smirk curled cruel. Then you'll hang with the boy. And your broken outlaw. Daniel's face burned with anger, his voice cracking. We're not afraid of you. Ethan's eyes locked with Barrow's, silent fire sparking. The square stilled, every heartbeat waiting for the thunder that would follow. The town's chains began to rattle. The noon sun burned hot, painting Graystone in sharp light that revealed every crack in its weathered boards. Sheriff Barrow stood tall, his deputies spread like wolves at his sides. Ethan's hand hovered over his revolver, his breath steady but eyes darkened with memory. Marcus muttered, "This is where fear is tested." Daniel's jaw clenched, his voice low yet fierce. "We don't run, not today." Barrow's smirk widened as he called out, "Cole, your time ended years ago. These people don't want your justice." Ethan answered, voice heavy with regret. "They wanted peace, and you turned it into chains." The townsfolk's eyes peeked nervously from behind shutters, trapped between silence and hope. The heat shimmered in the street, sweat dripping from Ethan's brow. Marcus steadied himself with his cane, his voice rasping. "This isn't about yesterday, Barrow. It's about tomorrow." Barrow stepped forward, dust curling around his boots, his badge flashing like a blade. "You think one boy and a broken old man make an army?" he mocked. Daniel's voice cracked but held strong. "Better men stand with him than with you." Ethan kept silent, eyes locked on Barrow, his scars burning with memory. The sheriff's deputies raised rifles, shadows stretching long across the dirt. Marcus's voice cut sharp. "Cowards hide behind law, while men bleed for justice." Barrow's cold laugh rang out. "Justice. Justice is what I say it is." Ethan's revolver shifted at his side, his voice quiet but heavy. "Then you've forgotten what law means." The crowd behind shutters stirred, whispers spreading like sparks in dry grass. For the first time the sheriff's certainty cracked, though his smirk never left his face. From the edge of the saloon, Clara emerged, her crimson dress trailing dust, her eyes sharp yet haunted. She called out, "Enough!" The crowd hushed, whispers falling silent. Clara's gaze cut to Ethan, trembling with anger and sorrow. "You left us once, and now you bring fire back." Ethan's voice cracked. "I came back to finish it." Sheriff Barrow chuckled, raising his hand like a ruler before his court. "She speaks truth. You'll bury this town twice." Clara turned to him, her face hard, but her voice quivering. "And you've strangled it every day since." Daniel looked at her with surprise, unsure if she stood with them or against them. Ethan whispered, "Clara, whose side are you on?" She faltered, eyes flickering between her past with Ethan and her bond with Barrow. The silence that followed was sharper than steel. The street grew heavier as Clara's voice softened, almost breaking. "I lost faith when you left, Ethan, but I never chose him." Barrow's smirk dropped, his hand tightening on his revolver. "Careful, Clara." Ethan's chest rose, breath sharp. "You still have a choice." Clara's gaze burned at Barrow, but fear flickered in her eyes. Daniel stepped closer, voice steady. "Truth don't belong to him. It belongs to you." Marcus's hand pressed firm to his cane, muttering, "Words won't stop bullets." But still, something shifted. The crowd stirred in the shadows, whispers spreading wider, a seed of rebellion breaking silence. Barrow saw it, his teeth clenched as he growled, "You think the people will rise? They fear me more than they ever feared you." Ethan's revolver lifted slightly, his voice steady. "Not for long." The wind howled through Graystone as Barrow's deputies raised rifles higher, tension stretching thin as glass. Ethan steadied his revolver, scarred hands no longer trembling. He muttered, "This ends tonight." Clara's eyes glistened with tears, her voice shaking. "Don't let this bury us all." Barrow snarled, "It's too late, this town belongs to me." Marcus stepped forward, cane digging into the dirt. "Then we'll take it back, inch by inch." Daniel shouted, his voice ringing with raw fire. "We're not afraid." The townsfolk stirred louder, courage flickering like a flame in dry wind. For the first time, Barrow's smirk faltered, though his rage sharpened. Ethan's finger brushed the trigger, silence deafening in its final pause. The war for Graystone had found its spark, and there was no turning back. The crowd's whispers swelled, and Sheriff Barrow's sneer twisted into rage. Then Clara's voice rang sharp as a blade. "Tell them, Barrow. Tell them what you've hidden." The sheriff froze, his deputies exchanging uneasy glances. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "What truth?" Clara's hand trembled, but her gaze locked on Barrow. "The man you follow wears a badge stained in blood. He killed the last sheriff with his own gun." Gasps rippled from the shadows, and Daniel's face turned pale with shock. Barrow barked, "She lies." But Marcus's rasp cut through. "I saw the body that night. You've worn his badge ever since." Barrow's face burned with fury, his mask cracking. Ethan's voice dropped low. "So justice never left Graystone. You murdered it." The silence became a weight pressing on every chest, and for the first time the people's fear turned into something sharper: anger. Barrow's deputies shifted uneasily, their rifles lowering slightly, as doubt spread. Clara's voice cut through the rising murmurs. "You served your greed, not the law, and the town paid the price." Ethan stepped forward, revolver still steady at his side. "All this time you claimed to be order, but you were just the storm." Barrow's voice grew frantic, a man cornered. "Without me, this town would have burned years ago." Marcus barked, "You're the fire that's been burning it since." Daniel clenched his fists, voice ringing. "You killed our law, and called yourself its ghost." The sheriff's eyes darted, searching for loyalty among his men, but only hesitation met him. The crowd whispered louder, the first hints of rebellion filling the street. Ethan's voice came like a hammer. "Your truth is out, Barrow, and it will bury you." The weight of silence cracked as Barrow drew his revolver with sudden fury, pointing straight at Ethan. But Clara stepped between them, her crimson dress a bold shield. "Then you'll shoot me first," she spat. Barrow's hand shook, his mask of power crumbling. Ethan's revolver raised slow, scars across his knuckles catching fading light. Marcus rasped, "Every lie you've carried ends here." Barrow snarled, "This town belongs to me." Daniel shouted, his young voice breaking, "Not anymore." The people's whispers became voices, cries rising like a storm tide. Windows opened, faces visible in defiance. Ethan's eyes locked with Barrow's, both men steady in silence. But Clara's trembling figure stood as the unspoken truth. The town would no longer be silent, no longer chained. The balance had shifted, and Barrow felt it breaking under him. Barrow's face twisted with fury, his revolver hand shaking. "All of you are nothing without me," he bellowed. But the crowd answered back, their voices uniting in anger. "Murderer! Thief!" The word, law, turned against him, shouted like a curse. Ethan's voice cut calm but sharp. "You hear them, Barrow? The chains are broken." Clara's eyes glistened, torn between rage and relief. Daniel's voice rang firm, stronger now. "We don't bow to you anymore." Marcus stepped forward, his limp steady. "A man alone cannot own a town." The people surged closer, no longer hidden in shadows. Barrow's deputies lowered their rifles fully, stepping back. His empire of fear cracked, brick by brick. The street trembled not from gunfire, but from voices, the voice of Graystone rising for the first time in years. The air grew still, the crowd's defiance ringing like thunder. Barrow's smirk was gone, replaced by fear veiled as rage. Ethan raised his revolver higher, his voice steady and final. "Your law ends now." Clara whispered, tears streaking her face, "Let this be justice, not vengeance." Ethan's eyes flickered, torn between two roads. Daniel muttered, "He deserves nothing less." Marcus's gravel voice pressed, "What you choose here will haunt the boy. Choose wisely." The sheriff's revolver trembled, his once commanding figure now reduced to a desperate man cornered by truth. Ethan's hand steadied, scarred knuckles pale, his breath slow. For the first time, Graystone's people looked not at Barrow but at Ethan, waiting to see what kind of justice would rise from the dust. The fate of the town balanced on a single trigger. The air hung heavy as Ethan and Barrow faced one another, the street caught in silence before the storm. Sweat trickled down Ethan's scarred cheek, his revolver steady, his breath slow. Barrow's badge gleamed under the sinking sun, but his hand shook. Daniel stood firm beside Ethan, his eyes locked on the man who had crushed the town. Marcus whispered hoarsely, "The law is a mirror, Cole. Show them what it truly is." Clara's voice trembled, "Don't let him drag you into his darkness." Ethan muttered, "I don't want vengeance. I want truth." Barrow sneered, trying to mask fear with fury. "Truth is written by the man who survives." The street narrowed to two men, past and present colliding. Dust swirled, lanterns flickered, and every soul in Graystone waited for the inevitable thunder that would break their chains or bury them deeper. The first move came fast. Barrow drew with a snarl, his revolver flashing in the dying light. Ethan's gun fired almost in the same breath, the sound shattering silence. Dust exploded in the street as bullets cut through air. Daniel ducked, shouting, "Ethan!" Marcus braced himself on the cane, his voice fierce. "Stand tall, Cole." Clara screamed, her crimson dress whipping in the wind. Barrow's shot grazed Ethan's shoulder, spinning him back. But his own bullet struck true. Barrow staggered, rage burning in his eyes. The crowd gasped, voices rising in chaos. The duel had begun, and the town's fate now rested in the echoes of each shot. The sky above darkened as if the heavens themselves braced for the end. Barrow stumbled, blood staining his coat, but his snarl only deepened. He fired wildly, shots ricocheting off walls, shattering glass. Ethan grit his teeth, pain searing his shoulder, but his revolver never wavered. Daniel darted forward, trying to shield him, but Ethan shouted, "Stay back!" Clara cried, "He'll kill you both." Marcus's voice cracked, "It's his fight, boy." Dust stormed around them, stirred by violence. Barrow's voice roared, desperate, "I built this town. I own it." Ethan's reply thundered back, "You poisoned it, and tonight it's free." His revolver barked again, another shot grazing Barrow's arm. The sheriff reeled but stood firm, his pride the only thing keeping him upright. The crowd pressed closer, their fear turning into raw defiance, the power of silence breaking forever. The gunfire paused, smoke drifting through the street like ghosts. Ethan's revolver clicked empty, his hand shook with exhaustion. Barrow smirked through blood, his revolver still loaded. He raised it toward Ethan with trembling fury. Clara screamed, "No!" Daniel moved without thought, leaping between them, his body shielding Ethan. A shot cracked. Daniel collapsed in the dust, a cry tearing from Ethan's throat. "No!" The boy's blood stained the ground, his eyes wide with pain but burning with pride. "I stood with you," he whispered. Ethan's rage ignited, his scars burning hotter than his wound. Marcus shouted, "End it, Cole!" Ethan grabbed Daniel's revolver from the dirt, his hand steady now, no hesitation left. The lawman's lies had reached their final breath. Ethan rose, Daniel's revolver gripped tight, his eyes burning with fire and grief. Barrow staggered, raising his gun again, but his hand shook uncontrollably. The townsfolk pressed closer, shouting for justice, voices like thunder rolling across the desert. Clara cried, "Don't let him steal more lives." Marcus growled, "Cole, end this now." Ethan's chest heaved, every scar, every failure weighing on him. His voice rang clear. "This isn't vengeance. This is justice." Barrow roared, firing one last desperate shot. But it went wide. Ethan's revolver answered true. The sheriff fell, his badge striking dust, gleaming one last time before fading in shadow. The street fell silent, but for the echo of justice, carved in smoke and blood. Graystone's chains had finally broken. The smoke cleared, and silence gripped the town. Sheriff Barrow's body lay motionless in the dust, his badge reflecting the last glow of sunset before fading into shadow. Ethan stood trembling, Daniel's revolver still in hand, his chest heaving. Clara rushed forward, her dress streaked with dust and tears, kneeling beside Daniel. "Stay with me, please," she whispered. Daniel coughed, his lips stained with blood, but his eyes flickered with stubborn life. We did it," he murmured. Marcus leaned heavily on his cane, his voice solemn. "Justice. It costs dearly, but tonight it was paid in full." The townsfolk stepped closer, their faces no longer fearful, but filled with reverence. For the first time in years, Graystone breathed without chains, though the breath carried sorrow as much as relief. The saloon doors creaked as townsfolk gathered, voices hushed. Clara cradled Daniel's head, tears falling on his face. "You're not leaving me," she pleaded, gripping his hand. Daniel smiled faintly, his youth both fragile and defiant. "I ain't done yet," he whispered. Ethan knelt beside them, his hand trembling as it touched the boy's shoulder. "You saved me, Daniel. You saved us all." The boy's eyes met his. "You gave me something to fight for." Marcus's gaze swept across the townsfolk, his voice steady. "We cannot let his blood be wasted. This town belongs to us now." Murmurs of agreement spread, and one by one they stepped forward, no longer bound by silence. Ethan lowered his head, grief heavy, but the spark of hope flickered within him. At dawn, the townsfolk worked together to bury Barrow on the outskirts of Graystone. No words of honor marked his grave, only silence and the cold wind. Ethan stood apart, watching the earth cover the man who once ruled through fear. Clara walked beside him, her hand brushing his. "The nightmare's over," she said softly. Ethan's voice was gravel, heavy with doubt. "Nightmares don't end, they leave scars." Marcus approached slowly, his cane pressing into the dirt. "Scars remind us of battles fought, and of what must never return." Daniel, pale but standing with Clara's support, forced a weak grin. "And scars tell stories worth hearing." The sun rose higher, painting the desert gold, as Graystone began its first day free, though not untouched. The town square filled as the people gathered, faces lifted to the morning sun. For years they had whispered in fear, but now their voices rose together. Marcus addressed them, his cane planted firmly. "Graystone is ours. No man shall wear chains again." Cheers erupted, rough yet full of life. Clara stepped forward, her crimson dress now patched with dust and hope. "Let us rebuild," she cried. "For Daniel, for Ethan, for us all." Ethan stood silently at the edge, reluctant to bask in their admiration. Daniel looked up at him, smiling weakly. "They need you, Ethan." His heart pounded, heavy with reluctance, but he raised his eyes to the crowd. The cheers grew louder, a town reborn in the shadow of sacrifice. Later that evening, Ethan stood on the ridge, overlooking Graystone, the horizon painted in fire and gold. The revolver hung loose at his side, Daniel's weapon holstered at his hip as a reminder. Clara approached quietly, her hand brushing his arm. "You could stay," she whispered. "This town could be home." His eyes traced the desert, the scars within him deeper than the ones on his face. "Home isn't a place," he murmured. "It's something I lost long ago." Marcus and Daniel joined them, the boy leaning on Clara's shoulder, determination in his eyes. "Then maybe it's something we can help you find." Ethan exhaled slowly, the weight of the past heavy but no longer crushing. For the first time, the horizon seemed to hold more than shadows.